Very cynical, of course, but you've got to talk about what you know, and what I know is Peppa Pig world. That's my life now. And I thought that'd be quite good, actually. I can make it a nice little structural part of the show. I can keep going back and back to it, just like we went back and back to Peppa Pig world. It'll be a fun prism through which to discuss the delicate dynamics of the modern parenting arrangement. Yeah, I was getting excited about that. Then, unfortunately, all of that was ruined in October 2021 when I turned on the television to see our dearly beloved former Prime Minister Boris Johnson doing some pretty scintillating stand-up comedy about going to Peppa Pig world himself, taking the topic off the table for the rest of the posh twats. I was livid! If you didn't see it, do check it out in your own time. A masterful piece of oratory, as we came to expect from the man. He came out, he said, has anyone been to Peppa Pig world? Then he started doing observational material about the characters, about how Daddy Pig is a slightly shit paternal role model. Bold approach from Boris Johnson, but a good observation regardless. I sat there watching it, watching my own material disappearing up in flames, thinking, well, I can't talk about it now. If I talk about Peppa Pig world, people will just think about Boris Johnson. That's the last thing I want. I was sat there thinking, fuck you, Boris, actually. If that's not too much. Fuck you, Boris, you selfish, greedy cunt. Which is weird, because I think otherwise he did an absolutely superb job. I don't know if you were following the big calls, but it was right as far as I'm concerned. I don't think that. I think the previous thing that I said. It's a delicate ambiguity to try and navigate when you did literally go to the same school as the man. Which I did, I'm afraid. I went to Eton for 5 years as a teenager. I've mentioned that in every stand-up comedy show I've ever done, because as my father always says, just got to own these things. It's actually advice from a separate conversation about land, but the point stands. The portfolio-based approach from Dad. So here I am now as an adult, trying to pop my head above the parapet of left-wing political comedy, but not quite so far that you can see my bow tie. That's the situation as it stands. It's hard, obviously. It's a conflict, you know. Whatever you believe, it's always there in your background. Last July, Boris Johnson's cabinet started to crumble. Everyone started resigning. That was pretty exciting. I was straight onto Twitter, pumping out anti-establishment tweets as fast as I could possibly type them. But I was also, to be fair, texting Tristram and Hugo about how our old captain of games had to stand down as vice chair of Conservative Youth. And how I wish that not every single word of that sentence was true, and I didn't have to add the further clarification, captain of games, brackets, Michaelmas. Ah, yes, the Michaelmas term, the autumn term. Our housemaster, he liked to spread out the captain of games jobs on a term-by-term basis to stop any one individual captain from getting too big for their boots. You see, for an incredibly elitist institution, we're actually very democratic. If you're already in it, that's how it works. Pull up the drawbridge, shuffle the deck. That's the school motto, in Latin. It was exciting, though. When all of the Johnson cabinet started resigning, felt like the whole world was on social media. The politicians were tweeting, the journalists were tweeting, the comedians were tweeting. KFC tweeted the Conservative Party directly. Always a powerful moment in your national discourse when the Colonel enters the chat. Just when it looked like Johnson simply had to resign, but still refused to do so, someone at KFC thought, it's time. And they tweeted a picture of Boris Johnson's head photoshopped onto a chicken. I was intrigued by this, and all the more so when I scrolled up to see this was actually a reply to a tweet that the Conservatives had sent to KFC in December 2019. On the eve of the 2019 general election, the Conservative Party official Twitter account had published a picture of Jeremy Corbyn's head on a chicken with the caption, "Dear KFC, we've found the most spineless chicken there is." And 2.5 years later, KFC replied, "You've got to be upstanding, some motherfucking Kentucky Fried Long game right there." The social media manager of KFC sat in the job for 2.5 years, watching and waiting for their moment. I think it's fair enough to have a quick pop at the government after the last few years, but I don't really think that's my job. I can't claim to have been as affected by their actions as a lot of other people, I'm sure. There's one particular action I'd like to complain about, and I found out about that in April 2021, just as the third lockdown started to ease, and a glint of optimism started to creep back into the nation. I received a chilling email from none other than Team Sport Karting. That's right, friends, I'm on the mailing list. The email began It is with a heavy heart. And I thought, oh dear, I'm going to have to read the rest of this email. I had a relatively busy day ahead of me, but I will always carve out time in the schedule to learn what has beheavied the heart of team sport karting. The email continued, it's with a heavy heart that we will not be reopening tomorrow as planned, because in a last-minute decision this morning, the government have declassified go-karting as a sport. What an email. And whatever your feelings otherwise, what a government. Often incompetent, often evil, rarely boring. No other government in the world was declassifying go-karting as a sport in the middle of the pandemic. The granular legislation to which these maverick fucks will turn their hand in times of crisis. As we all know now, they were getting lashed every single night of the week, and yet in amongst the parties, they were still arguing amongst themselves about how go-karting should be classified. Johnson slumped in a chair, trousers round his ankles, getting ambushed by cake after cake, as he bellows at a coked-up Michael Gove about how it's the cart that does most of the work, really. He respects Lewis Hamilton as a businessman, but not as a sportsman. That's his position. That is the final word. I've tried to distance myself from my school and my background in certain ways as an adult, but I'd have to admit most of the steps I've taken have been pretty inconsequential so far. I'll give you an example. Last year, I decided I was going to stop eating Soreen malt loaves. Not an easy thing to do. I'm a lover of the loaf, but I'm sure I'm not alone in this room. Then I read a very persuasive article about consumer ethics by a journalist I follow called Arabella, about how she, also a lover of the loaf, had decided to renounce Soreen since learning that they were big Conservative Party donors, and she couldn't enjoy her favourite malt loaves, knowing that they were propping up a regime that she hated. I thought, fair enough, Arabella. Where you go, I will surely follow. It is probably important to add for context that I do know Arabella because our schools went on a joint ski trip together in 2005. A ski trip that Arabella and we did not enjoy. We were the outcasts of the ski trip. Is there a tinier violin in the land than the one being played for the outcasts of the ski trip, left out of the action, describing the antics in the chalet in her words as depraved, and in my words, irresponsible with GCSEs just 17 weeks away. Let's not get our rocks off before we get our box off. A decade and a half later, I'm tracking her progress as a journalist, running away from her privilege as fast as I hope to run away from mine, and if she can give up Soreen, so can I. Of course, I will continue to eat the malt loaves that are home-cooked for me by friends of my parents who donate to the Conservative Party directly. I'm not going to make a scene in somebody's home. But I'm walking past it in the supermarket. I'm walking past the Soreen, and I'm walking past the Sabra hummus. That's not easy either. I loved Sabra hummus. Then I learned somewhere that Sabra apparently quite directly linked to violence in the Middle East. I read that and I thought, fine! Sainsbury's hummus isn't as creamy, but it'll have to do. And if your life involves that sentence, you've got to conclude that you've still got a pretty nice life. Again, these principles are not comprehensive. In March of last year, I went to watch Newcastle United playing at home. Hey, Ivo, aren't Newcastle United now fairly directly linked to violence in the Middle East? Yes, but a friend of mine's a Newcastle fan, and he said it'd be a fun boys' weekend, and it was. Obviously, I cut a strange figure at St James's Park, watching Newcastle United, eating my Sainsbury's hummus, thinking, I'm sending some pretty mixed messages to the Middle East right now. I think it's important to check your privilege where possible in life, but I also think it's important to be grateful for the opportunities you've received and the people who gave you those opportunities. My parents sent me away to an all-boys boarding school when I was 7 years old, but they thought that was the right decision, and who's to say whether that was a good decision or a bad decision? Space adventure. 1999. Percy was shooting to space in his rocket. He was beginning to feel dizzy. He didn't know if he would like space, and he missed his family. He wanted to be at home watching the FA Cup final. Would Man U be able to win it after the exciting win against Arsenal in the semi? Ryan Giggs scored the winning goal, and his tummy was so hairy that he took his shirt off. Percy couldn't take off his shirt because of his heavy spacesuit. And the dangerous atmosphere. He felt lonely, but this was his job. He needed to concentrate on space. The end. To which my teacher has written, Ivo, I think it is you that needs to concentrate on space. This story is about football again. Also, I don't think... What a note this is to receive from a teacher, by the way. I don't think Ryan Giggs took his shirt off because his chest was so hairy. Who's to say? Who's to say?